Will the Tampa Bay Buccaneers bounce back from a disgusting performance in San Francisco, or will Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals further expose Tom Brady and the Bucs even further? Diving into this matchup on this crossover Thursday right now.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Bucs podcast, the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We are your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Cincinnati Bengals, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we thank you for making us your first listener, your first views of the day. I'm David Harrison. They are James Rapien and Jake Liskow, and you can find us covering the Bucs and the Bengals here on this network and for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation on BucsGameDay.com and allbengals.com. Make sure you're also following all of us on Twitter at James Rapien, at Jake Liskow, and at DHarrison82, where I will forever be jealous of both you gentlemen because you simply have your names as your Twitter handles, and I've got to come up with initials and numbers and other. I used to have a hashtag, or not a hashtag, an underscore, and there it was just craziness. Crossover Thursday, as always, presented by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun and easy to play. No competing with other players, just you versus the projections available. Take 2 to 5 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry, and those entries take literally less than 60 seconds to enter. It's that easy. We love Prize Picks. We know that you will too. First-time users, you get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Gentlemen, a huge matchup. Joe Burrow just being Joe, Tom Brady just being Tom. One of them is an up-and-coming superstar, I think, in this league. Another one is a living, breathing legend, probably closer to on his way out than anything else. But on the Cincinnati side of things, guys, what is the biggest story for the Bengals entering this weekend?
Well, when you said up and coming, I thought maybe Brady was still up and coming and playing for another 10 years. You know, we'll see. You never know. I'm a big spoiler Bucs fans. I'm a big Brady guy. As Bengals fans this week are going to hate that I mentioned that multiple times, but it's true. And I'm not going to run from it this week. Biggest story to me is, can this Bengals team continue to keep pace? And what has suddenly become a 3-team race for the number 1 seed, I think, between the Bills, Bengals, and obviously the Chiefs, which right now they do have the 1 seed. I think the Dolphins kind of drop out of that after last week. So it's a 3-team race. And we wouldn't have said this about the Bengals 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, but we are now because they've won 5 straight the way they're winning games. It's not just Joe Burrow leading them past teams. The defense is playing at a high level. This team has been tested. The depth has been tested, and they found ways to get it going, whether it's on the ground with Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine, whether it's through the air with Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase is back now. So I know there are guys in that locker room talking about how they can make a push for the 1 seed, and they don't fully control their own destiny, but if they win out, they do hold the tiebreaker over the Chiefs and could have a shot. Especially with the matchup against the Bucs in a couple of weeks. So can they keep it going is the big storyline going into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of really good football coming in December, and I think that's the way that everybody wants it. But more often than not, you want your team to be involved in those storylines, right? Biggest storyline for me right now is whatever's going on with my lights. There's no flashing lights in my office, but on the screen I can see that my camera is doing something. I apologize to anybody who's bothered by that. But for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, it's basically the story that we've been talking about all year that has led up to this point, is that's whether or not the Buccaneers are truly coming apart at the seams. And when you look at this team so far, guys, they've scored 27 or more points in just 1 game this year, and it came in a 10-point loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. They did it 13 times last season. That's how much difference there is between this Buccaneer squad and the last one that we saw that was, close to competing for a Super Bowl title if injuries don't derail them against the Los Angeles Rams. And I picked the number 27 for a reason, because right now this season against the Cincinnati Bengals, and you guys can provide context on why this is, if you don't score 27 or more points, or more than 27 points, really, you're 6-7 against this team. So that's kind of the magic number, I think, if you're facing the Bengals and trying to get a win against these guys. But not only on offense for the Buccaneers, their defense has also looked out of sync. So that's why this entire team potentially starting to fold. And the absence of Antoine Winfield Jr. and Mike Edwards certainly playing a part in that against the 5 explosive plays and 7 if Chris Olave and Taysom Hill don't drop explosive passes themselves. that they could have given up against the New Orleans Saints. That probably would have led to another loss. But the offense has looked stale all season long. They've had some short kind of bursts of energy, and really they've been sparked by young guys like Rachaad White and Cade Otton. But your usual threats, your Mike Evans of the world, Chris Godwins of the world, really have not been able to come out and impose their will on opponents. And even in those short bursts of energy and comeback wins over the Rams and the Saints, and really kind of an all game, I wouldn't call it domination, but strong outing against the Seattle Seahawks, they're still only averaging 18 points in those 3 games. So even their bursts of energy aren't even getting them really over 20 points. So for me, it's just the continued struggle from this team, and whether or not, like I said in the opening, if the Bengals are going to be able to continue to tear those teams apart as the Buccaneers try to essentially stumble into the playoffs.
Feels like injuries are a big deal in this game for both teams. If you're just talking about general storylines in this game, the Buccaneers defense banged up right now. The Bengals likely to be without Trey Hendrickson. We'll see about Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. We know that Hayden Hurst is doubtful for this week. So some key players, Chidobe Awuzie for the Bengals on IR as well, out on the Bengals side of the ball. But like you mentioned, some key injuries on the Bucs side of the ball as well. What's interesting, though, despite all of that to me, and James being a Brady guy and David covering the Bucs, Tom Brady hasn't really lost like that very much in his life. Those of us that have followed the Bengals and covered the Bengals for a long time will all remember the "on to Cincinnati" Bill Belichick quote when they were together in New England. What's the sense around that being a possibility for Tom Brady this week, the "on to Cincinnati," and then the absolute demolition of what was actually a solid Bengals team by the Patriots coming off of a bad loss that year?
I mean, at this point in time, so I went ahead and followed my, I guess, bolder than it should have been instinct last week in my crossover with the Locked On 49ers guys, Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker. And, I admitted that every football logic in the world, you should point to the San Francisco 49ers winning that game, especially if Nick Bosa was active, which obviously ended up being active. But just I had this gut that this was going to be kind of a Tom moment. Going back home is only his second time playing in San Francisco, where he grew up wanting to play in the uniform that he wanted to wear throughout his childhood, college, all that stuff. And so I was just like, this just feels like a Tom Brady game. Obviously it was not. And this under normal circumstances would feel like a Tom Brady game. But I am now fighting the urge to even say something like that, because this is not a Tom Brady season. And quite honestly, this isn't a Tom Brady team. And I had the extreme honor to talk to Rob Gronkowski on for our show yesterday, and asked him, said, what do you see when you see this team, right? And he said that he sees a lot of talented players, but someone on the offense has got to step up and just get it done and just take over a game and put together 150 yards on the ground or 150 yards receiving. Just do something and just kick somebody's butt individually, and then let that energy trickle down to the rest of the roster. And I found it fitting. Not that I think Gronk had any loaded meetings necessarily between it, but typically when you see a Patriots team or even this Bucs team start to struggle, everybody says, okay, well, this is where Tom is going to do X, Y, Z and take over and things. But instead of saying Tom, Gronk is saying somebody. And I don't think that was a dig at Tom by any means, but I think it just kind of shows that this team is not necessarily a Tom Brady fueled team, more so as it is a team with Tom Brady, and they're all kind of stuck in the mud right now. And like Gronk said, anybody needs to step it up and get them out of it.
It does feel like that. It's a good way to describe the Bucs. It's a team with Tom Brady, not Tom Brady's team, for whatever reason. I don't know why. There's 1,000 things going on in his world, as a lot of people know. But Jake mentioned this yesterday, and I've thought a lot about it. It's still Chris Godwin, and I know he's coming off the ACL, but it's still Chris Godwin. It's still Mike Evans, who suddenly can be covered and be out of sync with Brady when he's not covered. And that to me is weird. So that would be I don't know if it's fear, but concern. Because if you're the Bengals, Eli Apple, Cam Taylor-Britt, a rookie who played pretty well last week against Amari Cooper, it's still Mike Evans. Yeah. And if Trey Hendrickson can't go, we can get into specific matchups and stuff, but if there was ever a formula for Brady to get going a little bit, it's not be able to pressure him. And so I do wonder, especially with Eli Apple and then a young corner on the other side, if the Bengals are kind of susceptible to what the Bucs have. At the same time, I don't think, Jake, that this is an on to Cincinnati moment at all, because Joe Burrow ain't getting blown out on Sunday. I'll tell you that. This isn't Andy Dalton gets rocked in Foxborough and can't counterpunch. this Bengals team could counterpunch. So I think worst case, it's a shootout, which could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think if not to get too far ahead of the episode, but I think if the Bengals lose, it's going to be by a one score, probably a late 2-minute type of situation like we saw against the Saints and the Rams. But I mean, this Bengals team is not the Saints or the Rams of 2022. So I think we can all agree that. We'll get to some of those key matchups. I mean, look, if Trey Hendrickson misses this game, Donovan Smith is not going to shed any tears about it. I don't know if you guys know the full history of Trey Hendrickson against Donovan Smith, but Bucs fans know exactly what I'm talking about. So
sorry. There's a holding call on Donovan Smith mid-episode.
There's always a holding call, but then Trey Hendrickson just mopping we're worried about Cam Jordan, but here comes Trey Hendrickson to just put Donovan Smith in his place. So we'll get to some of those key matchups. But first, here at the Locked On Podcast Network, we believe home should be where you and your family feel the safest, especially over the holiday season. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system from Simply Safe. And right now, Simply Safe is offering our listeners 40% off on a new security system. So don't put this off. Here's why I love it. I literally have Simply Safe securing my home as we speak. Simply Safe's advanced technology and remote accessibility allows me to confidently secure my home with minimal hassle, whether it's controlling my system from my smartphone app or viewing the crystal clear HD security camera feeds or the feeling of security I get from my high-tech sensors. It fits my life because I made the system myself. Well, my wife made the system ourselves. Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report. It was their third year in a row getting that honor. Don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any system at simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. That's Simply Safe with an I, SIMPLI, simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, guys, we're going to continue diving into some of these matchups. Like I mentioned, Trey Hendrickson and Donovan Smith. And look, I don't mean to poke too much fun at Donovan Smith. Apparently, there's some personal things going on that are kind of bothering him and impacting his play. And you don't want to make jokes about personal matters, but his play on the field has been fairly atrocious. So we're going to talk about that, I'm sure, coming up here in a minute. But also, after you guys are done checking out this crossover episode, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter, the most of the biggest storylines go behind the scenes and the scoreboards with local experts, only the way that Locked On can provide. Available on YouTube and anywhere you get podcasts. I cannot do that Locked On Sports Today bit to save my life correctly. Guys, key matchups for this game. Is it Trey Hendrickson against Donovan Smith? Like, did you guys dive into Trey Hendrickson's history against old Donovan there, or is there a different matchup that you're looking for these Bengals?
Well, the big issue is that Trey Hendrickson is very, very unlikely to play this week. He broke his wrist.
Grant Cohn of, I don't know if it's all 49ers or what they call the Niners site. Yeah, is it all nine? He told me that Nick Bosa wasn't going to play. And I said that on our show. I said, I've been told by Grant Cohn that Nick Bosa is not going to play. And I got called out by a lot of people when Nick Bosa played for passing on that information. But I mean, look.
It's not official, but it's broken. And they haven't came out and said it's broken. And Zach Taylor said day to day. I think they just want Tampa to prepare for him.
To sweat
I don't expect him to play
will
either.
Definitely be sweating about it.
And he didn't practice on Wednesday either, right? He wasn't even out there. At least there were limited practices by Tyler Boyd, who dislocated a finger, and T. Higgins, who is still dealing with a hamstring injury that popped up last week in practice. So that matchup still matters. It just might not be Trey Hendrickson, and taking that out to a bit of a broader picture, because it's not going to likely be Trey Hendrickson there. It might be Joseph Ossai. It might be Cam Sample. There will be a rotation in that spot. Trey Hendrickson does, for the most part, make the Bengals pass rush go. He's the guy that's creating havoc. He's the guy that's winning on his own and creating pressure all by himself without blitzes, without stunts, et cetera, et cetera. Tom Brady, on the other hand, being the quarterback, is a guy that is one of those quarterbacks you don't really want to blitz all that much, although you would also say that about Patrick Mahomes, and Lou Anarumo found some success blitzing Patrick Mahomes this year and selectively last year and picking his spots there. So I'm sure we'll see some of that this week. But if the Bengals can't get any pressure to Tom Brady with 4, Tom Brady's seen every coverage that exists. He's seen it more than anyone else currently playing in the NFL. Lou Anarumo does like to change the picture. He does like to make things complicated for quarterbacks. He likes to drop guys out from the line of scrimmage. He likes to occasionally rotate coverages, occasionally do some inverted stuff. But how much are you relying on that to fool Tom Brady, especially if you don't feel like you can get home or disrupt him or get him off his spot? And I know the Bucs offensive line hasn't been perfect this year, maybe hasn't even been quite good this year, that there's certainly some holes there, especially with some injuries that they're dealing with. I just wonder how that plays out. This defense has been playing really, really well. and they've overcome the loss of Chidobe Awuzie, and they've overcome the loss of DJ Reader at times. And getting DJ Reader back does matter, and it's a huge, huge difference. But they haven't had to deal with losing Trey Hendrickson yet. I mean, maybe for a few snaps here or there, but not for a whole game. And so doing an entire game plan for Tom Brady, you would expect to be able to perform if you can't get pressure to him, even if he isn't having his best season. That is, I think, a challenge for this team this week that has been very cohesive in the back end, getting excellent linebacker play, really good safety play. But you have Cam Taylor-Britt and Eli Apple at corner. And while they're fine players, I think they're NFL starters, they're beatable. And so that to me is a big challenge in this game for this team, where I agree with James. I think the Bengals will be able to get some points and they shouldn't be shut down in this game, but can they prevent it from being a shootout and kind of have that controlled feeling that they've had often throughout this win streak, or does it get really close and tight and open up the opportunity for weird things to really reduce the margin for error?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, I think when you look at those DBs, right, part of what's been plaguing the Buccaneers offense is, when Mike Evans, Julio Jones, Scotty Miller, Chris Godwin get open for some of these deep shots that you want to see teams hit from time to time. A lot of times Tom Brady is underthrowing the ball, and I don't care if you are, Eli Apple gets a lot of flack out there in the NFL world, and some of it well-deserved, granted. But
especially in the NFC South.
Especially in the NFC South, even if you are Eli Apple, if the football hits you in the back of the head, you don't have to have talent. It's going to fall incomplete, right? And unfortunately, we've seen that happen with Tom Brady some this year. And then other times when you don't really get the chance to really see if he would have been on target because they can't even get open, or they don't get open fast enough before the pressure gets home, and he's got to basically dirt it or throw it away. And so it just kind of makes it difficult there. And I would say that getting pressure on Tom Brady is always obviously what everybody wants to do. But I think playing in the hands of the Bengals, if Trey can't go, is, you guys know, and the old cliche is that pressure is cumulative, right? And he's been under a lot of pressure all season. And honestly, from the very beginning, you go back to when Ryan Jensen got hurt in training camp, from that moment forward, Tom has not looked comfortable behind that offensive line. So that's definitely playing into the Bengals' hands coming in. It's almost like having an extra pass rusher on the field by itself. For the Buccaneers offense, not so much Tom Brady. Honestly, I think this team needs to commit to what works for them. And some Bucs fans are going to get very frustrated hearing me say that, but that's a running game. And I think when Bucs fans complain about the running game with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's too much running on first down, and you end up in 2nd and 8, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 12 sometimes behind schedule. And again, you have a quarterback that's not comfortable behind his offensive line. That's always a problem. But really, the totality of running has been successful for the Bucs. And I think most Bucs fans, if you compartmentalize the first down running versus the totality of all the total running attack, I think you can see that the Bucs are 6-2 when they run the ball 20 times or more in a single game. They're 0-5 if they rush for 19 times or less. So that kind of shows you how important that running game is for the Bucs. Now, granted, 2 of those games they didn't rush for 20 times were against Kansas City Chiefs, where they were in a boat race, 41-31 loss, and the San Francisco 49ers, which was pretty much over before the plane touchdown in San Francisco. So not all of that is on the offense. Some of that is on the defense. On the couple occasions they've looked really bad. And again, going back to those injuries, I think the loss of Antoine Winfield Jr. and Mike Edwards play into that. But I think regardless, if you want Tom Brady to be more comfortable, look, the more he doesn't have to worry about pressure because he doesn't have the ball in his hands, the more comfortable he can potentially get. So they got to get those running backs going early and effectively. That's the most important part.
And the challenge for them there is going to be DJ Reader. And he's been playing out of his mind, containing a couple of really good running backs. And James, I feel like it's time to talk about the Bengals offense. Just this is your favorite thing, and we've hardly touched on it.
It's the better offense and the better quarterback. Oh, Tampa Bucs! Bucs fans are going to come after me, but he's playing better now, and that comes from the Tom Brady fan in me that's watched him since Michigan, right? But it's just it's true for what we've seen out of Joe Burrow recently. He's playing at a really high level, and so can the Bengals keep him in that zone, whatever the zone is? Jake called it the Goldilocks zone earlier this week. Whatever you want to call it, can you keep him in it? Right now, it's been hard to knock him out of it. And the offensive line wasn't perfect last week against the Browns. Didn't matter. He was able to figure it out despite not having T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd. And so this week, I think health matters as much as anything, because if it's just Jamar Chase, the matchup I'm going to watch is how many Tampa Bay Buccaneers are around Jamar Chase at all times. Because if it's not 3, if there's no T. Higgins and no Tyler Boyd, then I don't know what to tell Todd Bowles in his defensive mind itself, because that's what you should do, is you should triple team Chase. And so that's the matchup. is really outside of health. How do they match up against Chase? Because the Browns clearly didn't give hing enough attention last week, and he burned them for 10 catches, 119 yards, and one of the biggest plays of the game.
Yeah, look, I heard you guys say that on an earlier episode this week of potentially triple teaming Jamar Chase, and I think just the football traditionalist in me kind of flinched, right? But like it makes sense, and I mean, look, you put a DB on top of him, put a DB under him, and I don't know, maybe put a linebacker perpendicular to him somewhere, try to keep up with him if you can, and just at least hit him, right? Or maybe that's where Keanu Neal goes. Tell Keanu Neal to do nothing but kind of shadow Jamar Chase. I mean, it makes sense. And, the last thing this team can do, this Bucs defense can do is let him get loose. But you mentioned those injuries. I mean, Mike Edwards and Antoine Winfield Jr. I mentioned them multiple times on this show for a reason. Both of them missed last week against the 49ers. I'm trying to block that out of my memory. And that was a huge problem. They missed the Saints game. That almost cost them the victory there as well. Both of them limited in practice, so hopefully trending in the right direction, because that's certainly going to play an impact on who wins this game. And who wins this game is something that we're going to tell you or talk about here in just a moment. But first, we're going to talk about our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get all your latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league around, from football to basketball, soccer to esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, which you probably do because you're listening to this one, you can find all of those at BetOnline as well. Always the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about BetOnline, where the game starts. And before we continue this episode, we've got an important message from NHTSA. That's NHTSA. Imagine you're hanging out with some friends, you're putting back a few drinks. If you're a Bucs fan, you're probably watching another unfortunate performance. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end, people start heading out. You think about calling for a ride. But then you think, nah, you know what? I live close enough. I can make it okay. It's no big deal. Besides, if I do get pulled over, what's going to happen? Maybe my insurance goes up. Maybe I lose my license for a little bit, and either Jake or James has to give me a ride around, depending on where I live. You lose your job. Maybe you total your car. But you know what? You could also kill someone, or you can kill yourself. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop people from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's life forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, guys, prediction time. We're going to wrap up this crossover Thursday episode, making some predictions. I know some shows like to save their predictions for the last show of the week. I don't know if that's how you guys operate or not. I will make my prediction here. My co-host, James Yarcho, will make his prediction on our final episode. Cincinnati Bengals at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The home team always gets spotted 3 points, right? The Buccaneers are 3.5 point underdogs, which kind of tells you the bookmakers probably think this is about a touchdown spread, give or take, that the Cincinnati Bengals are really actually have an advantage over. Over-under on this one is 44. Gentlemen, are you going to be making your score predictions here, or you want to just talk about how you think maybe this thing unfolds?
It doesn't matter. I can talk about both. It is tough on a Wednesday to do that as we record this. I know it's crossover Thursday, but we're recording it on Wednesday night. And it's like, but I think I can put together a score. I certainly know who I think is going to win regardless. I think it would be silly, much like last week, to pick against the Bengals the way they're playing. Now, that doesn't mean I can't see the path for Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, because it's Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. It's Tom Brady and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and all of these guys that we saw win the Super Bowl a few years ago and storm back against the Rams, who ultimately beat this Bengals team in Super Bowl 56, right? I mean, it's a lot of those same guys. And so could this offense get going? I think it can, especially without Trey Hendrickson and some of the injuries to the Bengals. But I just think best quarterback in this game as of now, it's Joe Burrow. Best receiver, Jamar Chase. The more fluid and certainly consistent offense, which is kind of wild to say because the Bengals were so inconsistent offensively earlier in the year. But the Bucs are the lowest scoring team in the NFC South. I saw that this week, which is just wild to me, that this team led by Brady and company, they haven't scored. And so I think that they're going to score some on Sunday at Raymond James Stadium, but it's not going to be enough. Give me the Bengals 26-23.
All right, you got the Bengals 26-23, fairly close to the prediction that I have going here. Again, like I said, the question is about whether or not the Buccaneers can finally perform the way that we kind of think this roster on paper should perform on the field. And You know, we're past the midway of December point by the time this game actually happens, and I don't know, man. I've been holding out hope that, you know, there was going to be a turning point. The thing that was concerning me the most during the season is at times you would hear the players themselves kind of say, "We think this is a turning point," and I think turning points tend to be something we see in hindsight. They don't usually have. It's not usually something you can point to as it's happening and say, "Boom, there's your turning point." It's usually something you see on an NFL films production, and they say that was the turning point. So that kind of was a little problematic as we seem to a point where the Bucs pull out some sort of amazing last second win or a really strong game, and everybody's kind of relaxes and says, "Okay, now we're good. Now that's the turning point." And then we come out and we see the Buccaneers get smashed by the San Francisco 49ers. So underdogs at home, not something that we've seen from the Bucs in the last few years, but I think it's warranted. And I think that they lose by more. And as I see the Buccaneers right now, I do think the Bengals are on a roll. I think they're one of the best teams in the NFL for a reason, and they're showing why. And I think they win this thing 31-21.
I wonder about the Buccaneers' ability to defend the run in this game. We've talked a lot about receivers on both sides. I love the Bengals' run defense when DJ Reader's on the field, and this has been discussed on Locked On Bengals ad nauseum this week. We can't stop talking about how good DJ Reader is, but I wonder with how Vita, who I assume is doubtful to play in this game, despite Levante David and Shaquille Barrett and some of the players that are on that defense, can they deal with a running game when they're also worried about Joe Burrow throwing the ball, especially if T. Higgins is back, especially if Tyler Boyd plays? Then it's a little bit of a pick your poison kind of game, and the Bengals have been able to run the ball for the past 5, 6, 7 weeks. So I think that'll be one to watch. I don't do score predictions. I leave that to James. That's James's wheelhouse. But I just wanted to throw out one other little quirk of this game that I think, you know, we haven't really talked about to this point. But, you know, if the Bengals are limited with their skill players again this week, if they can get the run game going earlier, they've shown that they can win games that way this year against worse teams. The Carolina Panthers, who you're familiar with in the NFC South, not a very good football team. But then again, who is a good football team in the NFC South right now? Let's see.
I was saying the Carolina Panthers ran the Bucs out of Charlotte. So,
and the Bengals won that game by, I don't know. It was just not close at any point.
Yeah.
So
that was the 5-touchdown Mixon game. Yeah, it was a blowout.
The massive Mixon game. So,
and the other note, sorry, I just don't want to forget, AFC North 3-0 against the Bucs this year.
Wow.
So could you imagine if the one team that doesn't beat them is the Bengals? And weird things happen all the time.
That would be weird.
This Bengals team lost to the Steelers, you know, so.
As did this Bucs team. Yeah, Vita had not participated.
I can't believe you guys lost to the Browns, by the way. That was the
one. I mean, that one, you know what? So that one actually we put on the coaches, you know, a lot of these other ones, I mean, the coaches are taking a lot of blame, obviously, as well. But you could point to some player performances and a lot of these other losses. That Browns game, I think if Todd Bowles lets Tom do what he wants to do there at the end of that game, they come away victorious. But you mentioned the run defense, you know, Vita not practicing earlier this week. Carl Nassib, who was kind of a bright spot against San Francisco 49ers, supposed at least from an effort standpoint and kind of helping to try to keep the mojo going. Julio Jones also not participating. Jamel Dean, though, he's one of the bigger ones too, because even if they get Mike Edwards and Antoine Winfield Jr. back, but then you lose Jamel Dean, you know, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which is still progress, but I mean, it's not nearly as much progress as you want. So we got it's all Bengals here for predictions, and that's also a good plug for James's site there. Make sure you check out All Bengals for all their coverage of this. James Yarcho writes for All Bengals as well, so it's a family affair here. But guys, the biggest story recapping this episode here real quick before we wrap up for Tampa Bay is their continuation of coming apart at the seams. Just as we think that they're starting to figure something out or put something together, they take another step in the wrong direction, and it just seems to be the trend this season, which unfortunately is killing a lot of enthusiasm or optimism as we get closer and closer to the end of the regular season.
Bengals 10-1 against the spread in their last 11 games too. The Bucs, I think, have the opposite record. If I'm counting correctly, I see actually it's 1-9 against the spread in their last 10 games. So there's some trends there that don't look very pretty as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be an interesting game. James, I know, do you travel to the away games? Are you going to be down in Ray J?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Going to be at Ray J. Hopefully the weather's nice. Yeah. And you know, I'm excited to watch these two teams battle it out. So it should be fun.
Hopefully you don't get sick. I went from Virginia to New York, not last week, but the week prior, and then went from New York to Tampa and then back to Virginia. And I ended up with a head cold because just too many shifts.
Are you going to be? Are you going to be down there?
I will not be. I'm actually done in person covering the Bucs this year. Depending on playoffs, we'll see what happens with Washington, what happens with Tampa. If there's a playoff scenario, I might make it down for a trip there. But I have a feeling I'm going to end up in San Francisco. I'm not doing either San Francisco trip for either of the teams that I cover. But I have a feeling the playoff gods are going to send me to San Francisco as punishment for missing the regular season matchups.
Yeah, for Brady's future team next year. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I've gone on record saying that's exactly what I think is going to happen.
Did you see him talking up Christian McCaffrey? I mean,
he's said a lot of things, and I don't want to give too much away. James and I have a Tom Brady conspiracy theory episode coming up, and I'm going to drop a lot of my thoughts on Tom Brady in San Francisco. But guys, it's been a great crossover episode. Always love doing the crossovers, getting your guys' thoughts and expertise on these opponents. So thanks to everybody out there for making Locked On Bucs and Locked On Bengals podcast your first listens or your first views of the day. Again, for your next one, check out Locked On Sports Today. The biggest games, the biggest stories, go behind all of it with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on this app or on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. For Jake, for James, for myself, Locked On Bucs, Locked On Bengals, all Bengals, Bucs game day. Check out all the stuff that we're doing out there. And while you're out there, please be safe, be kind to one another. Enjoy the game this weekend. If you see us around, if you see James at Raymond James Stadium, make sure you stop by and say hi. I'm going to invite you to do that for him. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. And of course, thank you as always for joining us on this crossover Thursday episode on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.